Wow, what a wonderful video. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the MLK, the promised reflection of the last sermon of Dr. Martin Luther King. My name is Miguel Bustos and I'm the Senior Director for the Center for Social Justice that hosts these monthly virtual events, and want to just welcome all of you. And like we do all the time at every event, we want to begin with our land acknowledgement, acknowledging the people of this land. We acknowledge that we are on unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who were the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, and nor have they lost or forgotten their responsibility as the take carers of this place, as well as for all people who reside on their traditional territory. So as guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their ancestral homeland. So we wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, the elders and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone, and by affirming their sovereign rights as the first people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, like always, we have a phenomenal panel of people who are passionate, of experts, but of people who really can provide us with some wisdom as we look to how do we make sense of this last speech. So first of all, I want to introduce Isoke Fime, who's our very own at the Center for Social Justice. She is our maven of transformative learning, and boy is she, and we're so grateful for her because she brings over 25 years of experience working with groups throughout the country, supporting them to appreciate and engage in differences. She draws upon indigenous African concepts such as soul force, personalism, and vitalism. She also learns about she teaches about unlearning oppression and illuminating power at the center in an intersection of spirit and culture. Next, we're very honored and lucky to partner with Aaron Grizzell. Since 2010, he's been the executive director of the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Community Foundation. He has over 25 years experience working in civic and social justice and policy work. He's also the co-founder of King and Faith Series, a program that engages the scholarly and the faith communities in contemplation of Dr. King's message and legacy. And he's also the co-founder of the Black and Brown Comic Arts Festival, which is a comic book, animation, and popular culture expo that celebrates the arts of folks of color. Mr. Grizzell, thank you for joining us today. Next, we have Paula Farmer. She's Director of Community and Belonging at the Berkeley School. There, she develops dialogue about equity and inclusion and considers the individual in the context of institutional culture in order to realize a diverse community that thrives together. But special to our hearts at Glide, she is a longtime congregation member of Glide Memorial Church. She's very active with the church as a lay leader. She facilitates Glide's racial justice group, as well as Glide's book club. So we hope you can sign up to that one day. Finally, our facilitator and our sort of facilitator extraordinaire, Guled Muse, who is another one of the Center for Social Justice Zone. He is our community engagement and education manager. But before we start the formal program, let's take a look and watch Dr. Martin Luther King's last speech that he gave. In less than 24 hours, he would be assassinated.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
This is a CBS News special report.
Dan Rather reporting for CBS News from New York. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death by an assassin late today as he stood on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King had planned to lead another civil rights march in Memphis next Monday. We got the latest on the story now from Russ Hodge, news director of WREC-TV.
Wow. Going back to Miguel's point, 12 hours later, the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Distinguished panel, I'd like to start this conversation with you all by asking, what was running through your mind when you saw this video, knowing that this was his last speech? Starting with Paula.
Thank you, Guled. I was just thinking how prophetic it was. And then also how, in thinking about the wholeness of the speech, how it just seemed like he had come to a realization of what his path was going to be, and how he also was fine with that. And it reminded me, if you parallel that to when Jesus finally came to the realization of what was going to happen to him and how he would have to be a martyr, not saying that Martin Luther King was a martyr, but just that going into it with a peace of knowing that you've done your job and it's a job well done. And also having survived previous assassination attempts, and to be able to get through that, to do the work that he did and come out the other side of that. And the mountaintop is, for me, that pinnacle that describes that.
It's okay. Love to get your feedback.
Oh, wow. Well, I think the first thing that hit me was just this, what always hits us about, well, I shouldn't say always, but what always hits me about MLK is the way that his whole being is open to the resonance of heaven, like it just comes through him no matter what. And it's as captivating and exciting now, how many years later, was 68?
Yeah.
As it was then, to me. And it puts me in the mind of the culture out of which we came. You know, Black folks came out of a culture where the expression of the spirit, the expression of the soul was encouraged and given lots of room. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful and it's eternal. Like his body is gone, but that energy is still here. So that's part of my reaction, but I want to hear from Aaron.
Well, you know, it's funny coming from a long line of preachers. That's some good preaching, is what I could say at the very beginning. Is when that he knows his craft, so he knows how to preach. So that's the first. But behind all that, the Sunday before, he was at Mason Temple there on April 3rd. He was at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., preaching a sermon that was not unlike the sermon that he preached at Riverside Church a little less than a year before, regarding the issues of racism, of materialism, of militarism, and the like. And here he was moving from this, high church situation, discussing these issues in a very, in a slightly different way, in a different intonation. And then coming to Memphis, Tennessee, to the sanitation workers strike, to deal with the specific issues that he was talking about generally at the National Cathedral. So it's an art form to be able to share a general thematic framework, right, in a certain location, but then go into another location and to get very specific and very clear with the audience who needs it. So that's two. The third thing I would say is that just as King was dealing with the moral rightness of the human person, he was also dealing with that same issue at the economic level. We live here now, and there are there's a fairness when it comes to voting rights. There's also an economic fairness that has to be wrought, and thus the Poor People's Campaign and all of these other pieces that he had just as strong of an economic development message as he did a social justice message, because a part of social justice has to do with economic justice. And so as much as we talk about, the 1965 marches from Selma to Montgomery, the Bloody Sunday, then the second one going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then kneeling down to pray and deciding to turn around, to not face those guards until until the US Marshals came and then marched them over. There was an economic base to what he was dealing with. And that Mason Temple address and sermon was just as much about that, if not more so, than getting there, than the mountaintop. What was at the mountain, how he was able to talk about the mountaintop, was to see everyone lifted up. And seeing the promised land was seeing everyone having an opportunity, not just in voting, but in economic opportunity and the like. So I celebrate that about him in that sermon.
No, that's deeply amazing to get every one of your feedback on the last message. And what was really powerful about Martin Luther King was the fact that how he was like switch his mode, right? From being political to being the preacher that he is, with such fervor within his words. It seemed extremely prophetic, whether it's the I Had the Dream speech, whether it's the last speech before his assassination. I wanted to kind of like open this up by asking, why do you think spirituality played such an integral part with his work and with the civil rights movement? You know, because his message was extremely powerful and it was universal to everyone who heard it. Why? Yeah. So I'd like to open that up to you, Ahsoka.
Wow. Well, so when everything is taken, all dignity, all rights, all property, your children don't belong to you, your labor doesn't belong, nothing belongs to you. And in which you are at the bottom and not even worthy of sympathy, right? This is the narrative that had to be developed to support the ongoing institution of enslavement. You couple those conditions with the fact that we come from, I think we come from a region of Africa where we know that soul force exists and we know how to tap into it constantly. It is like breathing. And so, you know, when I was doing my research on my dissertation, I ran across this piece about how people would work for 14 hours in the blazing sun. And then you would think that all they wanted to do was either go and collapse in exhaustion and eat, right? And sleep, right? Because you had to do it again the next day. But no, what they discovered is that people would go and find what they called these brush arbors or hush harbors, so that they could pray, so that they could shout, so that they could release energy, so that they could tap into forces that would help them to be sustained. There is no way that 244-year history of legal enslavement would not have led otherwise to utter nihilism, utter despair, utter depression. But what happened? People kept moving and laughing and dancing and singing. And, you know, yes, they were also, you know, working toward freedom, but they knew that this joy that you get from spirit, from the invisible realm, was necessary for survival. And so that is just part of our beautiful story. That's the beautiful part of our story. And I'm actually going to ask us to like go black as black as we can here, you know, like, because I'm done trying to look all proper and stuff. I'm like, I want to talk about this is the juice right here. And I think it's also part of why we've been attacked so much, because it's like, dang, y'all just won't lose your life. You just won't go depressed. You just won't give up. Bam, 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 right? And for every bam, bam, you got somebody saying, baby, you know, there's nothing to fear, for God is here. Baby, count on God. Baby, let's sing. Baby, let's feel the spirit. Even if you don't believe in God, let's feel the spirit. It's spirituality is what got us through. And so, I don't know, I feel like we knew that when we heard him talking, we could feel that. And of course, you know, he was Christian, but Christianity just happened to be the way that we brought our spirituality through. But we can bring it through any kind of dogma, because it's about spiritual, it's about rhythmic entrancement. It's about, you know, it feels, okay, I'll say this is the last thing I'm gonna say, I'll be quiet, but the lowest of the low in Black culture, I think, is a demonstration that I got something to say and I'm gonna say it. I don't care if you're the king, the queen, the president, I don't care who you are. I have people in my family who are just as fervent and passionate as Dr. Martin Luther King was. And he was being that for all of us. Every time he opened his mouth, we were like, yes, yes, we could feel the spirit. Every time I feel the spirit, that energy. So without it, we would not be having this conversation, in my humble opinion. We would not be able to be sitting here if it weren't for the spirituality of Black people. And I think the spirituality of Black people has helped the planet, not just Black folks, the planet. All the people have benefited from that spirituality.
Yeah, and Aaron and Paula, I know Paula, you're part of God's congregation, and Aaron, I know you come from a line of religious leaders as well. I'd love to get your thoughts on why do you feel this is such an integral piece to the liberation of everyone, to have this spiritual component within the work of activism and organizing.
Paula, you want to take that?
Well, you mentioned being part of Glide. I asked Cecil and when she was with us, Jan, I used to ask them all the time, how did you continue to do this work? I'm tired and I'm just starting my life, And I think that having a spiritual center, you can't get to do this work, whether or not you call yourself an activist, or if you're just part of a movement and you're just going with the flow and you want to scream and you want to shout and you want to make things happen. Eventually, you're going to find your spiritual self, whether that be through meditation, whether that be through breathing. All of this is the spirit and of the spirit. Yeah. If it's going out into the street and screaming and crying and shouting just to get somebody to hear you, that is that spirituality of connectivity. Mm-hmm. And I remember, growing up in the church, and I would see the altar call, and I would see these adults go to altar call, and they would be weeping and they would be praying, and I just didn't get it. And I was like, why can't I feel that? And it's because I hadn't lived a life yet. That's basically what it was. And I remember the first time I had that experience, I must have been like in college, where I had enough burden in my life to where I was away from the privilege of being in my parents' homes and having me taken care of on a day-to-day basis. And I was in charge of myself. And that was hard. And so I found my spirituality and I found my community. And that's where the activism started to happen. That's where I started to see, this is not fair. This is not right. What can I do? And always we started with prayer. Always, if it wasn't prayer, if it was a more progressive group, we started with meditation, or we started with movement, or we started with singing. But there was something about lifting together and being together and connecting yourself to the earth and others that makes this work continue to be possible, no matter how downtrodden you get, whether or not you have to check out for a little while and come back to it, but there's always the work to be done.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. When I think about this idea that Asoke mentioned, this idea of relentless joy, I think of this line. It says, with the rhythm it takes to dance to what we have to live through, you can dance underwater and not get wet. Now, that was George Clinton's line in Aqua Boogie. And it rang so clear.
Say it one more time, Aaron.
I said, with the rhythm it takes to dance to what we have to live through, you can dance underwater and not get wet. That's the refrain, right? But it speaks clearly in my mind to what this idea of joy in the face of trauma, tragedy, oppression,
Degradation.
this hush harbor, these hush harbor moments were moments to shake off trauma and decide to embrace joy in many ways in order to get to the next day. And that's a lot of what our Sundays, and Sundays still a lot of what our Sundays are about when we go to church. For the African-American community and for Black folk, Sunday is the day to shake off the pain and gird oneself up to make it through the week, right? Through the fellowship, through the encouragement of song, through the sermon, through the altar call, through benediction, and through the fellowship after the service. All of that is nothing but strengthening in order to get through to the next week. And it's been that way for us, using the church as our syncretic sort of framework that we've used, having been sallied over here from this Atlantic voyage to find a way to keep our link with the divine and with our community. And so I think that's what King came from, the same place that many of us Black folk have come from. He came from a family that loved him, who had experienced a life of enslavement on both sides, but there was a certain love that connected that family together, that provided the principles by which he could live and create and speak to today's message, being in his time, and even today, it still lives. And so what his education gave him, and his graduate education gave him, it didn't give him what he needed in that sense. What it gave to him another language in which to articulate what he already had known. This idea of personalism that he got his PhD in was a way to, a new way and another way to articulate to other audiences what he already knew. Rufus Burrow speaks to that. Lewis Baldwin, who wrote about King, speaks to that as well. So he's able to go to the National Cathedral on a Sunday and speak a language, or go to Harvard and speak a language, and go to Memphis to a sanitation worker strike and speak the same language in a different mode, right? And his gifted ability to bring all of these constituencies together, 1964 at the Nobel Peace Prize, the same sermon, the same framework. It wasn't new. It was a different language to bring people together. And so when you hear him speak, he's not speaking. He's not saying different things. He's saying the same thing, but a different way. When we grew up, and we were encouraged to have different forms of English language. We got to be able to speak the language on the street. We got to be able to speak the language, in church. We got to speak the language in school. We got to speak the language at work. We got to speak the language when we're in a company of folks that are different than us. We had to have 5 different dialects of English in order to, and this is what's so interesting, but not unique about King. He was able to master that, and he was given the platform to be able to do that. And that's what was so interesting to me about what he was able to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, when you talk about the vernacular of Black people, you know, there's various degrees to it, you know, but for him, he was able to transcend all of that through his conviction and through the visions that he saw. And kind of backtracking here, you know, that vision that he saw was from that mountaintop, you know, at the end of his last speech. He saw from within the vantage point from his eyes before his assassination of this promised land that he spoke about. And I wanted to kind of just, you know, ask you all, are we, you know, this promised land that Dr. King talked about, do you feel like we have gotten closer to that vision? You know, it's been many decades since his passing, but I would like to, you know, with the experience that each and every one of you have in this panel, wanted to, you know, ask from your vantage point of the same mountaintop, are we closer to it? Follow?
Are we closer to it? I would say no, and I don't want to be pessimistic. I think for Dr. King, when he shifts to from where he was in actively engaging and taking in more information and studying Gandhi and studying peace and trying to figure out all the different modalities to get there, he was in it and moving through it. And the mountaintop is when you know, revert to strategy, where you're at the top and you now have this 10,000 foot view of what needs to be done. And I think once you get there, once you figured out that game of chess, that's when we start to see the demonization of the activists. That's where we start to see people being put on lists. That's where we start to see groups being called terrorists. And a division where Dr. King also talks about how Pharaoh would pit the slaves against each other so that he could keep them divided, so that the power would always stay. And that is what white supremacy is. And so as we are moving through our chess game and trying to figure out how do we get to that place that Martin was thinking of, what he was dreaming of, and the rights for all people and people being seen as humankind versus a race or a gender or what have you. I think the closer we get to a realization of what needs to be done, the more we get pitted against each other. And so it is incumbent upon us as a people, and not just Black people, as a people, that we not let that get in the way of doing the work. And an example I would use is, you know, quarantine during COVID, and George Floyd happens, Ahmaud Arbery happens, Breonna Taylor happens, and everybody's at home and all they have to do is focus and read. And we're reading all the books, and the white people and the Indian people, everybody is reading, and they're understanding a bit more about what it is to go through this life and not have rights, not have access, not have any type of equality. And it made sense because I'm in isolation, and they're having that sort of spirituality in themselves and that moment at home because they are trying to get through. They no longer have those same privileges while you're just at home and you don't have access. We saw that everybody had lost their economic status. Everybody was losing their access to healthcare and different rights. So there was a reckoning that was happening. But as soon as we were able to go outside again, that white fatigue showed up, where folks forgot. And now we're in this this place where the divide has been put on critical race theory. We don't want to know what our history is. And as long as we don't look at what the history is, as long as we don't tell those truths, the longer it's going to take us for us to, it's 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. As long as we continue to lie, as long as we continue to miseducate and misinform in the school systems, it's going to be harder to get there. That's not to say that we won't ever get there. But if we are still, all these years later, trying to pass voters' rights, and that's just one initiative that we were after, we are still having people to say that it is not fair for us to have food and water while we're waiting in a line. And we're waiting in that line because we've reduced the number of polls that are available for people to vote in. We've reduced the amount of ways that people can access voting. And as they continue to pile on in these different states, limitations, we are back at that place where Martin was even before he made it to the mountaintop. Mm. And so I am hopeful, but I'm an optimistic pessimist.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, there are multiple levels from which to view this, right? If we look, if I, just me personally, look at what my life looks like now compared to the life I had as a child, it looks like things got better. If I look at a forum like this, where white people are showing up with clearer, avoidable for decades is no longer avoidable. And sometimes I'm meeting white people who are more urgent about this than I am, right? So that's new, that's new. But the real change that, I mean, and you know, there are 4 of us on this screen and ever how many, 47 or however many, you know, other people in this call, each of us would have a different way of talking about this, but I want to bring what I think, and one of the things I hope is that we can all find the prophetic voice inside ourselves, because I think that we find leaders, we cast them into a role, we project all of our hopes and dreams onto them, and they are going to go down either by natural causes or by being taken out. I think one of the things that one of the points in history we've come to is that we have to find the hero inside, find the prophet inside, find the place inside from which to lead, from which to live. So I think this is a radical thing to say, maybe it's not, but in my imagination, I see oppressed people as the ones who are going to lead us out of this mess that we're in. But the only way, what's stopping it right now, in my humble opinion, and I am a psychologist, so I apologize, all my psychology is going to be my first frame of reference most of the time. And it joins up with spirituality in the sense that, you know, one of our teachers said the kingdom is within. So everything that I love outside of me is inside of me, and everything that I hate outside of me is inside of me. I feel like this is the biggest hurdle we as a civilization, as a species, have to come to terms with. We still want to make bad guys good guys. We don't know how to be with the fact that each of us is capable of greed, avarice, jealousy, don't give a damn, all that stuff that we point our fingers at others about. That's who we are. But we get to choose, right? But you cannot choose if you don't believe it. If you think there's only good guys and bad guys. And all I got to do is figure out what party you belong to, and then I'll know if you're a good guy or a bad guy, which is horsepucky. Because I know a whole lot of progressive people who wouldn't stop and help a fellow traveler on the road. And I know a whole lot of conservative right-wing kind of people who would. How do you explain that? So for me, I'm like, how can I lead without my victimization? Yes, I've been victimized. My people are victimized every day, all the time. But if my role here, if my mission here is to help liberate the planet, all people, then I have to somehow figure out how to step out of victimization and see. And this, to me, this is what brings me back to Black spirituality, among other things. Native people, Asian people, every group has been given its special talents and skills and abilities that need to be at the table. But I'm talking about Black skills and talents right now. And so to me, one of the thoughts I wanted to bring up tonight is this idea about when I was growing up, I'm gonna bring this way down to community level. When I was growing up, when people acted out, people didn't know how to behave themselves, or, you know, you had to keep an eye on them. Mom and them would say, honey, it take all kind of people to make a world. It take all kind of people to make a world, which I feel is a radical thing to say. Because we may say that, but we don't really believe that it takes all kinds of people to make a world. And so I want to work with what's inside of me, which includes hatred of white supremacy, hatred of patriarchy, but I don't want it to lead the show. It can't lead the show because we've done that. We've been down that road dozens and dozens of times down through history. You did me, now I'm gonna do you. You kept our people from da-da-da, so now we're gonna do that to you. Or we're gonna, you know, it's not the answer. It's not the answer. To me, I'm gonna slow myself down here for just a second and finish this thought. Freedom is an inside game. It's an inside thing. I am learning to be free. I am not fully free. And my lack of freedom is not about anything that anybody's doing to me. Because I tell you what, you can remove all the obstacles, but I've already internalized the fear of being a big, strong, powerful person. That is my enemy. That internal fear of showing up no matter what, in my full humanity, in my full divinity. Right? That is my biggest obstacle, not the stuff out here. So the promised land is in here. And I want to figure out how to liberate myself, and whatever tools, whatever processes help with that, to share those. But I think that's where we are. We have to stop pointing the finger and refusing to accept that we are the same thing. We're all doing the same stuff. We're all complaining. We're all mad at each other. We're all giving up. We're all, you know, cheating. We're all supporting white supremacy in our own way, not because we want to necessarily, but it's a habit of mind. It's a habit of mind that it's hard for me to tell my beloved white friends and family the whole hard truth, really to bring the truth hard and clear with love, because I've internalized the cult of whiteness, I call it, the cult of normative whiteness. So I don't know, I kind of took a lot of turns.
No, I mean,
there.
this is really powerful that you mentioned the fact that the promised land is inside of us, and that the internal struggle is one that not only Black folks in particular, but universally, all of us should fight, you know, in order for us to transcend, you know, whatever density of the isms that divides us together. And you know, that's really powerful, because you speak about the resilience of, you know, how Aaron said that this the voyage, you know, of people being stolen, you know, being stripped away from everything, but nothing could take them away from their connection with the ethereal realm, and how it's ingrained in the DNA of the Black community, to and in the way that it's transmuted towards how universal solutions is creating the vision that we all want to live in, you know, and in that peace. Aaron, I know earlier when you were speaking about Martin Luther King and just the external factors of this division that's been separating us, this lowest common denominator. I don't be really hearing this too much within the activism and organizing space, but you spoke about economic injustice, you know. This is something that he was organizing on. And, you know, I want you to elaborate a bit more about that. You know, why is that been a factor in his work?
Sure. Sure. In 1967, can you guys hear me okay?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. In 1967, at the 10th annual Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King addressed the board and his audience about what they were doing, what the SCLC was doing with Operation Breadbasket and some of the other economic development campaigns they had in Chicago and in Cleveland. And he was lauding those, many of those achievements, the Red Rooster stores, and they were putting formaldehyde in the meat, and selling it to folk in Chicago, and how they got rid of that, and how they really sort of did a lot of this groundwork stuff that impacted the local communities there in Chicago and Cleveland. This was 1967. But what he lamented on a larger level was how small, how significant at this local level, but how small these achievements were in relation to the size of the real problem and the size of the structural problem that needed a larger solution. And that was a discouraging point for him. His whole time in Chicago, when he left the South and moved up to Chicago, was a very difficult time in his space. He went and they had a march in Skokie, Illinois, and he mentioned that at that march, that was the most dangerous march that he had ever participated in, more dangerous than any of the marches in the South or anything. It was in Skokie, Illinois, because it was a type of vitriol and anger that he had not seen in the white community before in the South. It was a different type of vitriolic sort of structure. And he saw that there were two different types of arguments that needed to be had in the North and the South. And it was difficult for him. The North was a tough spot for King. He didn't come from that area. He went to school in Boston, but he didn't come from Chicago or Harlem or Philly or any of those. He came from the South, and they had different urban issues. That was bracing for him, and it was toward the end of his life during that time that he found how bracing that was. And the Poor People's Campaign was something that he saw that could bring the entire community of marginalized folks together, right? And it was an economic message, right? You had poor in the North, poor in the South. You had last one hired, first one fired in the North and in the South. In the North, you had these rampant housing discrimination issues that were just incredibly intractable. In the South, you just had segregated communities. You're not living over here. You know what I mean? You live on that side, I'm gonna live on this side. In the North, it was just a really tough sit, and out here too. I mean, the whole way that the San Francisco Human Rights Commission was created came out of the marches on Van Ness Avenue and with the car dealerships there and the like. This was in Watts and the like. That all of these were intractable issues, and so this economic message was one that was central, I think, to King's. I think his latter part is post 1965 sort of framework to see, oh, okay, you know, we've got a moral high ground that we can speak to, when we spoke to that. But the real ground game, and this goes for us even today, the real ground game is, are we gonna have folks in the school board meeting every week? Are we gonna have people at the economic development, you know, commission meeting, you know, every week? Are we going to have, because it's the structural areas, it's the institutional frameworks that we have to participate in if we want to see lasting change that is central to a better material, meaning a better sort of economic sort of life. It's how we can realize the material framework of beloved community, right? Are we not just living out fairness, and are we not just living out equity, but is that equity being structured into the laws that we create, or the regulations that we create out of those laws? Are we putting our vote where our mouth is when we go to the ballot box? Some of these very basic things, I think, that are that he was trying to, I think in the latter part of his life, work into this idea of beloved community, not just in our own head and heart, but in our active everyday ethic of living. That's why in Amos chapter 5, verse 24, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Justice as what we see today as justice, but righteousness was in the Hebrew community, righteousness was an ethic of good works. It wasn't a, you know, spiritual living sort of situation. It was the material proof of your faith in the divine. It was an ethic. What did you do for the poor? In the New Testament, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in jail, did you come see about me? Those types of things, these structural pieces are what King, I think, was trying to work toward, and which was very discouraged. So when you go to Hebrews, and I'm no biblical scholar, don't even hold me to that. But when you go to Hebrew chapter 11, verse 1, now faith is the substance of the things we hope for. Faith as substance, faith as something. Faith as substance of that thing that we hope for. Hope wasn't a sweet by and by. Hope in that term was active. It was an action. So faith is the substance of the thing that we are acting toward. That march and those marches he went on is what hope is. The action is what hope is. The faith is the vision that you see from that hope. We are marching because we want to get voting rights law enacted. That's the faith. The hope is the 54-mile journey that we are making in order to push our government to do. Those are the types of things that I think King was working on that were discouraging, but he couldn't stop. Why couldn't he stop? Because he had too much faith. There was too much to do. There was too much vision. There was all out. That's the, you know, that's the stuff of the awesome problem of being stuck and called to do that type of work, because it's hard stuff. And he knew it was hard. And when he stood there in the pulpit at Mason Temple on April 3rd and said, I may not get there with you, he had those death threats and all of that stuff. But he was tired. He was tired. And if I don't get there, he saw the promised land because he saw what hope can do when you stick to it. He saw it because things happened. Voting Rights Act came into being. All that, he saw what can happen. So he can see, I can see the promised land because stuff happened, that kind of thing. That's what's exciting to me, but it's daunting, it's tiring. But those of us, meaning all of us who are called to this type of work, are gonna be tired, and it's gonna be hard. You're gonna be alone sometimes, and the only one that can understand that specific issue that is out front. Mm-hmm. But if you can see it, that means you've got faith and you've got to do something about it. And that's the awesomeness of the task that I think we see. That's, you know, it looks discouraging, but if you got hope, if you're still walking, then, you know.
I mean, just the duality of hope, you know, is pessimism, it's the struggle, right? It's that pairing that makes, you know, the life of an activist and a leader and just whoever is trying to find a meaning of life, just have that purpose. And that's what Martin Luther King had. And he brushed up on a lot of, like, you know, points and on solutions, whether it be the marches that led to, even on a local level, the San Francisco Housing, the Human Rights Commission here in the city. Also, you spoke about, you know, just like organizing and these other solutions. I would like to open this up to you all. Like, what would it take for us to get to this promised land? Like, how do we achieve it as a people? Because you brought up the fact that he saw what was beyond the isms, and that's what united all of us. You know, he found something that was universal that really brought us together. And now we're dealing with so much that's being taken away. You know, we're dealing with the Voting Rights Act, we're dealing with the voting rights, we're dealing with, you know, critical race theory. So many things are being brought upon us, but I'd like to open this up to you all. Like, how do we achieve to get fully to the promised land? It's okay. Oh, you muted.
Thank you. I'm noticing that, you know, so often in these conversations, there's this bifurcation between action, you know, acting for change and changing the inner landscape. That there's always a tension there. And I think that both are necessary. You know, I often think, well, I'm really glad that there were abolitionists. You know, that was all about action, right? That was all about action. Even though many of those abolitionists, I find out later in life, is they wanted slavery to end, but some of them did not want that next step. They didn't want Black people to have equality. That wasn't their agenda. Their agenda was that they thought slavery was immoral, and that's where their commitment ended. And that's all right. But one of my teachers, Ricky Sherover Marcusa, wrote a book called Emancipation and Consciousness. And in the last chapter, she's a Marxist, but she's also a person who believed that we have to address subjectivity. So many activist movements don't want to attend to subjectivity. So you have a revolution. Our side wins, but we didn't do any work on the consciousness that created the problem. So we just create our own, we become the new regime of the new tyrants, if you will. That has happened over and over again. So to me, I think we need people working on all these different levels. Not only because when we win, we run the risk of becoming what we tried to get rid of, but also because what stops someone from doing the work? What stops people from doing the things, Aaron, that you're talking about, from taking action, from having faith that's rooted in substance? What stops us? If we don't know what that is, we just keep spinning and we keep trying the same things over and over again and wondering why they don't work. I think we have to work at the level of consciousness. And I know I'm kind of a lone voice in that crusade, but or a minority voice in that. But I do believe that if I just look at my own personal life, when I think about the kinds of things that I wanted to change, like I grew up with child abuse. It's not enough to say, I'm never going to do that to my kids. You know, there's a tiny percentage of people who can say that and mean it and live it. But most people who have been raised with violence will somehow or another reenact that violence, sometimes on their own children. I did that. I had to go and do inner work to stop doing that. Now, I was motivated by a desire to have my kids be free in a way that I wasn't. But I'm bringing this up because I think it's so important to really notice what blocks change, what blocks people's ability to act for justice. And some of it to me is like that we're raised to think that we're small. We're small and we can't make much of a difference. And leaders get killed and we don't want to get killed. There's a whole lot of reasons why we can't find the strength, the courage, and the determination to change things on the outside. So yeah, that's my little piece to do. And I think one of the things that I long for in the world is for us to acknowledge that everyone has a role to play and they're not identical. What you, Guled, have to do to bring, to offer to the movement is different from what I have, from what Paula has, from what Aaron has, and all the people on this call. So I think when we should just be really generous with our, like, what can you do? Maybe it's just smiling at somebody on the street. Maybe it's just, whatever. It's like, not everybody can do the same thing. And we were implanted within us was our qualities that I have a quality. I have qualities that pull me in a certain direction. And I want that honored. And I want to honor the direction that you're pulled toward. What are you pulled toward doing? I want to support you in that, hold you up in that, and not worry that, oh, because I'm not doing what you're doing, there's something wrong with me, or vice versa. So I just noticed that tension, like it's always present. And for anyone who may be struggling with a similar issue, like feeling like you're not doing enough, you're not enough of an activist, I want to say that the spirit and the soul are very strong. And your real job is just to find your inner divinity. I know it sounds crazy and it's like, it's very there's a secular group and I feel a little nervous saying that, but that's the task, Find your inner divinity, and that is what will give you the courage. Now, I think people of the civil rights movement found it because they had community, and community is so vital, but our communities have been shredded. You know, I had probably 50 relatives in San Francisco when I was growing up, and now there's like 4, maybe 6, you know, like what happened to all my people? What happened to all my people in San Francisco? We don't have community anymore. And where they go to worship and the messages that are coming out of the preachers' mouths in their places of worship, I can't tolerate. That's just the truth. I would love to be able to hang in there, but I can't. I can't deal with it. I cannot deal with a religious attitude that says, if you are not on this page with us, you are doomed. You are going to hell. This is the only gate. This is the only eye of the needle. And I just don't believe in a divinity like that. I think that divine gives us millions of eyes of needles to come through. So there's a lot of unworked stuff that we have to look at. And I mean, I'm just bringing up some of it for myself, and yeah.
No, and I really, appreciate that. Once again, it's okay about the inner work and how important it is for us to keep pushing and for us to start off even like from there on the internal level. And that this is highly valuable and filled with wisdom. And thank you so much. It's okay.
Can I just, before you move on from me,
Yeah.
Guled, to say all these ways are important.
Yes.
And I want us to just love each other and encourage each other to, what is your path? What is the thing you are called to do to make the earth a better place, to help racism end, to help sexism end, and homophobia and all the other isms? What is your calling? You don't have to be like me. I don't have to be like you. I just wanted to make sure, because I'm not against activists. Like I'd be up a creek without a paddle without heavy duty activists out there doing the policy work, the advocacy work like you do. And yeah. And I used to do when I was young.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're a part of the Center for Social Justice, so your work is definitely integral to the work that we do. Paula, Aaron, what small steps can, our audience do, to get to help all of us collectively move closer to Dr. King's vision? Start off with you, Paula.
Sure, I'm trying to consolidate that. I was like writing down a few things, and I wholeheartedly agree with it's okay, and that it starts from within. One of the biggest battles that I'm finding is that a lot of people don't know who they are. I mean, we're doing all of these DNA tests, we're tracing our roots back, we're appropriating other cultures, we're doing all of these things trying to find out, who am I, and ground ourselves in that. So I think for me, that is one of the places where I start, is doing the identity work. One of the things that we found that was very important when Minister Marvin asked us to relaunch groups, because there's always been a racial justice group at GLIDE, but it's had different iterations, different focuses, and all of those things. And then we were coming into the Summer of Reckoning, and he asked some of the congregational leaders to get together and do different types of work in areas of our expertise. And I was so happy that Pam Noley and her group of white anti-racist got together, and she took them on this journey of identity work and really understanding who they were. And as I was relaunching the racial justice group, one of the things that I found is that we were not in the past all on the same page about what that activism should look like and what it could look like. So we started with education. So this is not a place for white tears when you come for racial justice. So you need to go figure out who you are with Pam Noley, and then come over here and we're going to do the activist work together in the racial justice group. It has been working so beautifully, and I am so proud of the people who are sticking with it 2 years later. They go to Pam's group on Friday, and then they come to my group on Monday. And we have 6 initiatives that we're working on, and that was group led. It wasn't one person coming in saying, I think we should do this, I think we should do that. It was really education. And so one of the other things that I think is key in getting the promised land is educating yourself. We hear all kinds of negative things that are coming into the media about different activist groups. And because they're the buzzwords and we're constantly hearing about them, and we see interlopers who are coming and giving these groups bad names, that we're not really understanding the positive activism that is happening there with the people and what their initiatives are, what they stand for, and what the work is. And as Isake said, it takes all kinds of people to gather in this movement. And I'm going to chip away at this part of the problem, and you're going to chip away at that part of the problem, but we can't other each other, right? So we have to figure out what is the common ground. So that means I'm going to meetings that I typically would not go to. You know, we are sitting in on the city council meetings. We have members who are going to the reparations meetings. We have members who are going to the transgender council meetings. So we're all over the place, and we're exploring and figuring it out. And one of the things that I think is super important, don't ask somebody to come teach you. Do your work. There is an internet. There are the Googles. Get out there and do your own education before you start to ask crazy questions. Now, if you're around your friends, they might give you that latitude, and know that friend first. However, if you're not educating yourself before you get there, the rest of us who are tired are not, we're not trying to do that work for you, right? So come in knowing where it is that you're trying to go so that we can help each other get there together. And then another thing is the courage to make mistakes. Yeah, I talked a little bit about the white fatigue before. Like I'm interested in this idea or this concept, but I'm afraid to raise my hand. I don't want to make a mistake. Or just being totally disconnected just because you don't have an identity and you don't know why it should be important to you that we work together so that we have equality. So having that courage to raise your hand, to make mistakes, to ask questions, and find a safe space to do it in. You know, if you're not sure, find that safe space to do it in. There are meetup groups, there are congregational life groups, there are university groups. There's all kinds of places where you can go to do the work. And then I think also developing your own empathy, creating a way to agree to disagree, to then educate yourself on why that person might be taking that stance, to understand the background of that story, and then formulate a new opinion. Like if you need to double down on that, double down on it. But at the same time, there's an exchange that needs to happen, because in your disagreement, that person might not know what they don't know. And I also run into this all the time. It's not my job to educate. If you don't feel like that's your lane, then dismiss yourself from that and find another way to get in with the activism. I am very much about education. And then I think in the end, once you get your education, once you have a better understanding of your identity and you're continuing to build on that, you're building your community. The next place is balancing yourself within capitalism. And that is getting back to this idea of the Poor People's Campaign and everybody having enough. We have enough in America. That's one of my mantras when I wake up in the morning. I have enough, and I am enough. I have to remind myself of that every day. When I feel like I can't pay this bill or I can't pay that bill or I don't have enough saved up for this or that, I have to just say I have enough, because I'm living indoors. I have clothes, I have nice glasses, I have a job, I have food on my table. I don't have to worry about it. It might not be what I want to eat, but I have food. And so dismissing yourself from this idea that I have to have more, I have to get further ahead, because what that does is take you away from that connection to all of humanity. And you have to figure out, how do you ground yourself and be better with other people as you pull them along. And I'm going to stop there. I have some other things on my list, but I'll let Aaron go.
Yeah, this is definitely valuable. Thank you for sharing. Aaron.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate this time with everyone. And certainly thank you again, Miguel and Eric and Guled, for inviting me to participate with these two wonderful panelists. And so I certainly appreciate the conversation. I would just, sort of take sort of what Paula had mentioned and what Asoke had mentioned. And I think I just very simply, from my sort of vantage, just hone in on one area, and that would be working the structural lane, right? And if we're talking about what, through King's vision, what would it take to sort of get to the promised land? He talked about that, right? We've got this here, but as he was coming toward the end of his days, it was a structural map that he was thinking about. Going to your local commission meetings and going to those, participating in the local political life of your community, running for school board, or participating at a level to in your own local society, in your own local community, to begin to create change from inside those structures, while we're doing those other pieces, that are attacking the injustices of what we may see. While we have those, there is a structural element that we need to play a role in, that can help ensure that food is on folks' table, right? If we aren't there at a board meeting, or if we aren't participating in the decision-making processes that determine how we live, this is the government, this is the structural framework that we have as a democratic society. We have participatory government. We need to participate, and that's that part of it. I would just leave myself with, in thinking about Dr. King as he's in watching the April 3rd sermon at Mason Temple. It's the participatory part of government now, the grunt work of our participation that needs to, that he was moving toward, and I think it's still needed today. It's the boring stuff, but when you look up, you can see the change that has happened, but it's hard to see the change while you're in it. But it's the getting in it and doing that grinding work that I think King was interested in as he was coming toward the end of his day.
Thank you all for your wisdom in these stepped actions for our audience members on how to get closer to the vision of Dr. King. I know I'd like to, just thank, Byron and Billy for these questions. But unfortunately, time doesn't permit for us to answer them as we're getting closer to the end of our discussion. But definitely, we really appreciate you for for helping us within stimulating the conversation. It's okay. Would you do us the honors of of closing us out with song to help us inspire, to help us stay inspired, to keep us moving?
I'd be happy to. I realized like, well, I hadn't thought ahead about what song. But you know, one of our favorites at Glide and in the movement was Ain't Gonna Let Nobody. So I would like to, if possible, do this in such a way that maybe I start it and then we turn off, somebody else turns on their audio and sings a verse of it, because we are congregational singers. We're not, I mean, there are a lot of soloists, but congregational singing is one of the ways that we tap into source and get energized. So I would start it and then maybe I should ask ahead of time, are there any singers in the group?
I'm a pew singer, Miss It's okay, so.
That works. Just maybe 2 or 3 people would be really great to just do a verse. Miguel, I know you can.
Well, no, I want to impress, not depress.
Oh, come on now. Okay, so ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on to freedom land. And then you can just insert racism, sexism. Somebody, please.
Ain't gonna let no racism turn me around.
No,
Turn me around.
no.
Turn me around. Ain't gonna let no racism turn me around. We're gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on a freedom land.
Yes, one more.
I ain't gonna let no hate turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I ain't gonna let no hate turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, I keep on talking, marching on to freedom land.
Yes.
Yes. Amen to that.
Amen.
You also, I wish I could offer that as well, but the screens might crack if I started singing. Yeah, I would like to thank you all, the audience, for listening and watching the event. Hopefully this conversation here inspires that each one of you is integral in helping with achieving Dr. King's vision and what he has prophesied for all of us. Special shout out to the CSJ team, Hannah, Eric, for helping us with logistical and technical support. Miguel, thank you so much for believing in me, opening up this event and setting the tone for this conversation. And lastly, our distinguished panelists, thank you so much for a wholesome conversation about this topic. If you feel inspired, if you'd like to learn more or want to get involved, head over to glide.org/the Center for Social Justice to sign up for our newsletter and call to action. With that being said, my name is Guled Muse.